I'm Petrus, and welcome to WorldView. WorldView is a podcast where we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can change our worldview. If you've watched some of our content so far and liked it, please consider liking this video, subscribing, and donating on Patreon. Today we're talking with Marlene le Roux. Marlene was diagnosed at a young age with polio and overcame a rough upbringing to become a disability and women's rights activist. She is the co-founder of Women's Achievement Network for Disability and the CEO at the Artscape Theatre Centre in Cape Town. Marlene, welcome to the show.
Hi, this is so good to be with you, and I'm quite honored to be on the show.
It's our honor, actually, and you look lovely today, so thank you so much for joining us. I have to start with our intro. We gave some sort of, hint or so. It might sample the mood a bit, but we gave a bit of a hint and so that you were diagnosed with polio when you were younger and had quite a rough upbringing. I've heard that started around November in 1967. Could you perhaps tell us a story, if you're willing?
You know, Petrus, is that I live every day with gratitude. I say we are now in COVID time, and I look at myself as I'm in post-polio because I'm 54 years old, and I've survived polio. I've survived apartheid. I had a brain tumor as well on top of that. I had COVID as well, and sadly I lost my mother on Christmas Day in 2020, but on 3 months time, I was 3 months old when I contracted polio, when the virus were available for decades already in other countries, and only now, actually last year, have said Africa is free of polio. And I don't want this to happen with COVID. That is why my role totally changed now, because I use myself, my own story. I should have never contracted polio because it was in 1967 when the virus, it was already there. And it was totally a basis of that in that time, the clinic ran out of vaccine that was for Black people. And then I couldn't get access. My parents, my mother, who was a single mother, couldn't get access to the vaccine. And that's why I'm very much by saying that the rolling out of the vaccine should be available for everybody. Irrespective about class, irrespective about color of your skin, religious or what background, it should be based on equality. And I use my story now currently to spread that.
I mean, it's actually, like you said, you live in gratitude. And I think one thing we should be most grateful for is the fact that we actually, I don't want to say my generation, but, the generation that's being born today will never know the virus, will never know the polio virus because it's been eradicated in Africa. Even though it took this long, it's been an absolutely wonderful situation for them to never have been contracted with it. For those that don't know, could you give us just some explanation or the experience of having polio is like, what it does to you, so that people understand the gravity of the situation?
Like in Vlaams and in Afrikaans, you'd call it kinderverlamming. And what polio does is that it weakens your muscles. So in essence is that you can be paralyzed, you can die. And what happened to my mother is that the priest and the doctor told her that I'm going to die. And she can give away, and doctors can be very clinical. That's why I'm on a broader sense an activist for disability, also training doctors on, because doctors' curriculum is to heal people. It's not to look at, how am I going to say, because to have a disability, it's not a sin. It's just you have a disability and you need to cope with life. And I was one of the lucky ones that only my left side of my body I'm struggling to walk, and I wear a caliper. Most of people with polio, they're either in a wheelchair, both arms or legs, or they die literally. And it's also where your lungs can collapse because it's muscles. It's all about the muscles. Unlike TB, you can't reverse the effect of polio. It worsens when you get older. And that is why I'm so happy, Peter, that you're interviewing me, because when you come to Africa, and I am a pro person of integration of rehabilitation and using public clinics, not just for high blood pressure, diabetes, but to also to look at disability inclusivity, so that persons who have polio need to get regular physio, needs to have access to nutrition, needs to have access to the new word Pilates, a
Mm,
biokineticus, in order to stretch your muscles. Otherwise, you're in spasm. So, what happens is that you can have in your younger days mobility,
mm,
and then you don't need to wear a caliper. But as you grow older and you don't have access to the medical care, your whole life changes and you don't even know. The next thing that happens, you must have crutches, or you land up in a wheelchair and you die early. So, my other role now as an activist, as a polio activist, is to spread to people, and to at least, because so many diseases happen after polio, that the person that is post polio survivor of polio, the the effects of post polio, the research thereof is not communicated really to the medical fraternity.
yeah, yeah. No, definitely. And I mean, especially even so in back in 1967, which was a period of time where the availability of medical care, the how much doctors put effort in, was actually incredibly strictly tied to somebody's class and race and position that they held. And you've mentioned as much, in the sense that the vaccines were there was a shortage of them at that point in time, and it was simply just allocated to a different race. That type of scenario is something that you're actively fighting against today. And would you say that if you had the same availability as everybody else to the care that you needed in that day, that you would have lived without disability today?
I want to say I'm a happy person with a disability,
Mm,
because my mother was a single parent and she was married. All my whole life is about 3 months. So, Beatrice,
mm,
she came home and I became the 11th child of my grandfather, Frank, and my grandmother, Christina
mm.
Abrams.
Yes.
And we I come from very poor background, so there were seasonal workers, farm workers. My mother was a factory worker, but that in them were instilled actually that they felt so guilty that this child because was given now polio because of them, because it was the way it was communicated to them, was basically, it was not the doctor's fault, it was their ignorance because they were illiterate. And when I became actually a teenager,
Yeah.
I needed to tell them that I am happy.
Mm,
And because my mother and my entire family and that community rallied around me, and they were the community that didn't have money, but they knew how to share the resources. They knew how to lift me as a person. They didn't have the vocabulary to use the political correct words of not using the word cripple. Like now we talk about persons with disabilities, they
right.
use the word Malinki di cripple Macy, like in translation,
Yeah.
Malinki, who's the cripple girl.
Yeah.
For me, that was nothing.
Mm,
But they made sure that I was integrated into the family. There was this whole acceptance of who I am. I will never forget, Beatrice, where my mother and my grandma, because those days, because they were persons of color, you need to take off. If you take off from work, you don't get a salary,
mm,
or they won't ask you back to go pick the grapes or the figs, or the
Yeah.
peaches or whatever they needed to be picked on the farms that time. But they took off and they dressed me in a school dress with my little suitcase. And they didn't know the word feminist or
Mm.
activist. But they took me to that time, it was sub A, grade 1. And they decided that their Malinki must go to school, just like any other 6-year-old. We got to the school, and the school principal, and I stand there, she helped everybody. She came to them and asked them, "What are you doing?" They said no, but they're coming to enroll me for grade 1. And she said, "But there's no place for cripple me. What are they going to do with me?" And there they made a decision. My granny and my mother decided that day they're going to have a sit-in, Petrus.
Okay.
And they said to the principal, "Until I am not located to a class, they are not going to leave." And that is how my miracle actually started. Without any fanfare, without them calling themselves activists, they decided I must have an education.
Yeah. And it was just the simple love and support of your family and I mean your friends as well, your whole community that came around you that put you in the position where you are today.
That's what I can say to you. I live with gratitude. I live with, I can't believe that I'm still alive, but that I can still speak to you today. For instance, that when my mother needed to take me to my whole childhood life was actually in hospitals. Princess Alice home was in retreat. And I grew up, I tasted, I smell everything about apartheid.
Mm.
And those times, everything was segregated. And we needed to walk for 2 hours to the train station because we didn't had a car.
Yeah.
And the community used to carry me on their backs. I call them my Abba community.
Hmm.
And they would take turns to have me on their back to get to the station. And then a neighbor will go with my granny and my ma with me on the segregation in the train, on the train, get to Cape Town, 2 trains again, get to retreat, get finally to Princess Alice home, just to find out the doctors is on tea. I can still smell up till today the urine, the filth of where we needed to sit. Then the doctors will come. They won't recognize these beautiful upright women. Their eyes will cast down to the floor. The doctors will talk to each other. They won't ask once how they feel. My caliper must be fitted. How was my week or my month? And then just the next patient. And so, without any words, without any bitterness, we will take this long train ride back. The community will wait for us at the train station, and I will be Abba back
Mm.
without anyone asking for money.
Mm.
Everybody. So as I'm sitting here, Petrus, I can say to you, I'm the Ubuntu dream.
Mm.
I am a miracle of the new South Africa.
Mm.
But I will never forget where I come from.
Mm.
I will never forget what it feels to be invisible.
Mm.
I will never forget what it is to be discriminated. And I will never forget how people will belittle my upright mother and my granny in front of me
Mm.
just because of the color of their skin. That is why I'm a fierce fighter that this must never happen to anyone again. Not where I am in charge or where I am visible or just at a braai or just in my house. I am extremely sensitive to feel when somebody feel left out because I know that feeling in the belly of my stomach.
Mm. And you fight this on an individual level, like you said. No matter where you are, where you're in charge, or at the Braille or anybody else, you actively fight this personally. But I just want to know, how do you fight this, or how do we go about changing this in the places in society as a more broad perspective where this still exists? How do you go fighting that? Is it a culture change? Is it regulation? How do we go about improving, having the same positive outlook and will to better the world like you do?
Because maybe my background have really trained me really for not, I don't call it obstacles at all. I think it's new experiences with new outcomes. I will never say to sleep without food is right. Never.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you don't have a 10 rand, you don't have a 10 rand. But if
Yeah.
you can't work with a 10 rand, you can't work with a 1,000,000 rand.
Yeah.
So work ethics, how you see people, is of utmost important. And I think because I've been exposed from a very little age to so many diversities, which I could observe, to so many things, because you must remember apartheid was very successful. Apartheid was successful because it was institutionalized.
Okay.
And institutionalized, it means that geographically you were put accordingly to your skin color. And geographically, you were also being, for instance, for me, as a colored little girl with a disability, I even had it better than a black coarser girl with the same disability.
Mm.
So I needed to recognize that. I
Mm.
needed to recognize there were some privileges that I had just because I was lighter than the other girl. And it's very important aspects that you first need to own up to your own prejudice. And for me, it was because I was in a big family and we looked like the Rainbow Nation, because my great granny came from India, my great grandfather came from England, and there was the slave background, Indonesia. So we're a mixture. So when you come to my family, you will be so surprised. Are you family members? We're from the same stock. So, but apartheid has was evil in a sense that it deprived you from the necessity to just being human in certain aspects. And for me, from a very young age, because I was brought up very religious, the church played a big role in my life in
Mm.
developing the sense of who I am. And the Dutch Reformed Church was based also very much racial lines. So the colored people will go to the Protestants church, for coloreds, the white. And there was just a street that was between us.
Yeah.
And I was developed very early. I grew up in Wellington, as you know, with music. And I grew up in my community because I would like to pay homage to them and tribute to them, because they were wonderful musicians. Everybody could play a musical instrument. And my mother was a beautiful dancer. She was a singer, and I was surrounded by the minstrels. So Wellington is very famous for their musicians. So from a very early age, I used to travel with the local musicians in our own communities to the farms to go and sing. I was 6 years old, and I was a full-time singer actually, from
Mm.
farm to farm, and that's why actually how I found my voice
Mm.
actually. And but what I want to state to you is that even in the church setup, where you were supposed to be, where God was love,
Mm.
God was portrayed only on a certain basis. So I was then asked to come and sing at the white church, just
Mm.
opposite the road. I was then asked to sit at the back in the consistory. That time you call it, where the priest will, before they will go into the church,
Mm.
I must wait in the back. So when it was my turn to sing, they will come and call me, and I will just sing to the white people. They will clap, and I must be gone. And I
Mm.
thought to myself, but what the hell is going on there?
Mm.
And I started to get my voice. And as I started to get my voice and started to interrogate my family members, they were not ready.
Mm.
And I realized that I started because music is the universal language. And I started because I'm also proud Afrikaans speaking woman. And it's because Afrikaans is not a white language. It's a
Mm.
language of everybody.
Mhm.
And I then started to have friends in the township. And then my own family was uncomfortable about that. So I was the first in my family because I had wonderful teachers that believed in me besides my own family. But what was most important is that the teachers opened up my world that I can also be whoever I want to be if I study hard. And I can still remember in 1985 we had really the uprising that time, and I was in matric,
Mm.
and we were practicing for our first play, and then the police came in to confiscate everything. We didn't have a matric ball, everything was taken away. And then with all of this, I've passed with matric um, examination that I
Yeah.
could go to the university. And again, the community rally for me.
Mm.
And my mother then that time hired a car to take me to the University of UCT, University of Cape Town. When we got there, in all her haste, in all her proudness, she forgot that I must have a permit to study at
Oh.
UCT. Yes, that time we needed to have a
Yeah.
permit. And when the professor saw me, he said, "You are of color, you need to have a permit." And I was auditioning for the opera school.
Yeah.
I passed the audition. They didn't realize I was disabled. And very cold in my mother's face. Her high hopes, her best dress she had on, I will never forget that. We
Yeah.
just said, "We won't have place for a colored, crippled girl. There won't be place." And he had a sip just like the doctors, teacup and all.
Yeah.
And there we stood. Again,
Yeah.
we went outside because my mother hired this car. And she said, I was crying. I thought my world was crashing. And she said, "No, we never give up." We didn't know anybody at the University of the Western Cape.
Yeah.
It was the best thing that could happen to me. It was Mother University of Life for me. And
Yeah.
in 1986, my mother stood again in the queue, had again a sit in for me. She only had grade 2. I must be at university. And there UWC, University of the Western Cape, had
Yeah.
their first woman with a disability. And it was the best thing ever.
Yeah.
There I've learned. I was then exposed to the real world.
Mm.
I was taken away from my comfort zone as a colored woman where we were all equal. My roommate was a Xhosa woman. I had my next door neighbor was an Indian woman. And so the University of the Western Cape was actually not just about the curriculum, it was my life lessons.
Mm.
And and there I've realized that life I needed to become a political activist. And there again I want to pay tribute to my friends, to my lecturers, to who also there, they also abbaed me. And I was just the ABBA girl. But I also just want to share that I was very early in my life, I decided to be a happy person.
Mm.
I made a literally decision that I am not going to sit in the corner to wait on somebody to ask me for a dance. I love dancing. My friends used to take me, Corinne, Jolene, Alexi, everybody, my cousin Marjorie, Crystal, Olga, they used to take me all over. And I decided, but I have rhythm. With my caliper, I taught myself how to dance.
Mm.
Then I went also to the clubs, and then I realized because of puberty, everybody wants a girlfriend or a young person who must be normal.
Yeah.
And I have a friend born the same year, Marion Kibru, contracted polio. She walks with crutches, and we used to do this game that young boys will be interested in us when we sit, and we will say, "Come, let's go to the toilet." You could literally see how they look away.
Mm.
We have accepted ourselves. So I want to say to you, Beatrice, I literally made a mindset change
Mm.
from a young age. I have accepted myself. And when I made that acceptance, I then went on the journey of healing. I went on the journey that I'm not going to take myself so serious. If you have a problem with me, it is going to be your problem,
Mm.
not my problem. But if
Mm.
I want to dance, I'm going to dance. If I want to swim, I'm going to swim. The first time I really had a swimming lessons was at UWC, but I used to swim in the pools in the because we couldn't access. Wellington gets to 45 degrees,
Yes.
but the municipal pools was only for white people.
Hmm.
So we could only access the Bainskloof pools, which is in the mountain.
Yeah.
So there I've learned to have the stamina to walk that mountains with my caliper for water. So I
Well.
could swim perfectly because if you are thrown in the deep end, you do it.
Mm.
So for me, I always had the you need to have guts because if you are in a household of 11 people and sometimes 14 persons, and I only slept on a bed alone when I went to the University of the
Mm.
Western Cape. I only slept with other two persons. I'm still a terrible lover, Petrus, because I sleep straight jacket because two people on a single bed were sleeping next to me and I'm in the middle.
Mm.
And but for me, it is I can live tomorrow out of nothing. I
Mm.
will survive
Mm.
because I know how it is to survive with nothing. But I always say to myself from a young age that it's your attitude
Mm.
that's going to make it. So I make it easier for people. I give a lot of training also for persons with disabilities in a sense that self acceptance starts with yourself.
Yeah.
If you can't accept yourself, no one is going to accept you. And then I also talk about equality and equity. We can be equal when we sit down, but immediately if we're going to walk, I need a caliper.
Mm.
So for me to be equal with you, I need to have a caliper. So I need resources.
Mm.
So when we talk about the equal world can't exist if you don't give the resources to the people that doesn't have the resources to enable persons to be equal.
Mm.
And it's a very fine line which people don't want to talk about. So
Mm.
when I look, even if I'm a disability activist, it's very important about talking about resources. So
Mm.
we can't just talk, if I'm talking about my own country, South Africa, we can't just talk about accessibility if we don't talk about resources, if we don't talk about technology, if we don't talk about equal education, if we don't talk about transport, we can have both equal opportunities, but then I don't have a car and I don't have parents who have an infrastructure to get me for the job interview.
Yeah.
And these are the things which is of utmost importance.
Yeah, yeah. I think I saw a post the other day about somebody that said the one of the most underappreciated or misunderstood things about people in disadvantaged situations financially or physically or so on and so forth is that being poor actually makes people more poor, because if you're not able to afford a car to go to a job interview, then you can't get the job, and then you don't get income. So it actually, you have to have resources in the first place to be able to have the same opportunities and get yourself out of whatever situation that you're currently working towards. But more specifically, back to you, I wanted to ask, you said you do a lot of counseling and training with people with disabilities to have the right mindset to empower themselves to think more positively and to take charge of their life, even with disability, to make a better situation for them. But it also sounds like some of the most formative people in your life, the ones that really helped you get where you are today, is also your parents. So is counseling also equally important for the people around the person with a disability as it is for the person themselves?
I had a child, my angel Adam George. He was cerebral palsy and he died when he was 16, 4 years ago. It was really my light, but
Mm,
I could make that decision to have two full-time nurses that could assist me, that he be in my home, and that he's going to be happy and I'm going to be happy. But not everybody can make that decision. I could make that decision because I have a good job, in order, because if you are disabled, you need resources, you need money to have equality, you need money to have nutrition, you need money to be able to be equal and to access those opportunities, but also the mindset around. So awareness, disability awareness is of utmost importance. That is why my activism is also to look at that universities, training colleges. If you're an engineer, for instance, I always say you need to be understanding spatial, emotional intelligence in
mm,
order for you to do planning at a municipality and for housing. How on earth can you do housing and planning if you're not emotionally intelligent, and if you didn't in your curriculum were made aware of how wide the width should be in a house that you build for a person with a disability,
mm.
and uh, a ramp, you just don't have a tick box
Yeah.
about a ramp, because sometimes the person in the wheelchair can't use the ramp. It was just a tick box for companies to put the ramp there. The person can't use that ramp. Then it's when we look at the universal accessibility design, which all on the United Nations countries have actually signed to, it's
Mm,
not actually implemented, because you can have all the policies in the world, but if you don't budget for it, if you don't reprioritize your budget, it will only be words. Vision without action will only be a dream.
mm.
But vision with action, with budget, you change mindsets and worlds, and you give people the freedom to be human beings. And that is the mindset. So I can do whatever training. I can make the parents aware. I can make the society to be much more accessible. But if that young person doesn't have access and resources to education, equal education, to any person, and the tools for that young person to make that person accessible, then all the training in the world means absolutely nothing.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, without, I mean, you can make the person think and feel and give them, empower them emotionally to do what they need to do, but there's still certain hard barriers that just simply any mindset can't come over. Like, for example, if the building is not made accessible for somebody with a disability, no amount of thinking will get them on the fourth floor for their class for that day, for example. it You need the basic infrastructure and building blocks.
Then, Petrus, I also want to say is that coming to companies, it's that the first thing I do when I'm employed, I do it nice with my red glove, smile. I'm not an angry person with a disability. I'm not angry because it's important. I need to change the mindset in the workplace. I go to the HR department, and then I look at the policies and the implementation thereof. And then I look, because I'm also a women activist, to look at whether in the workplace for women, then I will look at the leave cycle for women. Women get a hysterectomy. Most women must take leave because they get pregnant. I'm also a gay activist, because it's important that you don't just look in your way. When you're an activist, you must be an activist for everything that which is not equal and accessible. So I look at HR policies at the workplace to make it accessible for everybody. So you don't just look at policies that is there and you say you need to make people feel uncomfortable. I'm a CEO and I'm a woman. Don't schedule the meeting at 8 o'clock at night. I don't want to fit in. I want to be home. I want to also see to that I am there for my children with my partner. So don't schedule. I don't play golf and I don't want to play golf. So I also have specific needs. So I say that if I'm breastfeeding, there should be where I have the opportunity to have the choice to come with my baby to work with a carer and have a room. And at Artscape in my workplace, we have a comfort room which we've designed where when you have a child that you want to come to the theater, or even if you are at the workplace and you had an Adam, I always use my circumstances as a parameters so that it mustn't happen to somebody else. Where you can sit in the comfort of that room, go feed your child, have that interaction and go back to your workplace, and you are at your workplace. The same when it comes to cultural interaction. Perhaps we're the only theatre in the world that has a prayer room. And this particular prayer room is for Muslims to do dua as a salah room. It's used by Jewish people. It's been used by Christian people just to meditate. It's been used now for people just to have a space where they can just be with themselves. It started out as a salah room in the theatre.
Mm.
It's now an inclusive room for everybody.
Mm.
And when we talk about inclusivity, don't just look at your own circumstances. Don't just look at, oh, it must be only inclusive for me. But what about the others that's been excluded? And when we start with, we have the best constitution in South Africa, we must guide that constitution. We must look around into the world. When we become complacent, racism can come to the fore so easily. Prejudice, sexism,
Mm.
homophobic, it can come to the fore so easily. We need every single day to be aware of all these things in order for us. We can't just talk about a better place in this world if
Mm.
we not actively look at programs and actively talking about it. It's not going to change. But we love to talk when I always say in the workplace in South Africa, you are forced to be diverse. In your home, in geographically, if you're poor and you're black, you stay in Kailicha. If you're poor and you're colored, you stay in Manenberg. So the integration only happen in a class system when you are having money. And until we don't break down the class system and we look at equality with equity, then we can move ahead. And you need to say the things, uncomfortable things, in a way to bring people to understand that you are prejudiced. Even when you stand around the braai with your friends, you're going to lose friends. I have lost friends because I'm going to say to you, in my home, you are not going to use these kinds of words. And in my home, don't think because we share the same skin color that I'm thinking the same like you. Because apartheid was a mind game. It was about our thinking. So you can't just say when that person is have a white skin that that person is automatically racist. That person perhaps have a privileged background that we need to talk about. But you also in this day and age, I can't just see a black or a colored child and assume that that child is underprivileged because my child is not underprivileged. She lives a privileged life. So, in a nutshell, Petrus, I will say to you, poverty doesn't know color.
Mm. Yeah, no, definitely not. No, I mean, every little bit of our South African spectrum is affected by all of the issues. It's just predominantly we have to face certain things that in the past have been racially divided in terms of addressing them, and now in today's age, we're luckily in a situation where in the new South Africa, we need to focus on the people that need resources, disregarding any type of other prejudices that we place on top of them. With regard to that, I specifically want to ask, we said that you were the co-founder of the Women's Achievement Network for Disability. You've mentioned some of the amazing work that you've done at Artscape as your time as CEO there. What exactly does the Women's Achievement Network for Disability strive to do?
Karen Smith, she's also a woman with a disability, a phenomenal woman. Um, and the two of us have decided because we are in workplaces, we want to give back. We use every year our own money and we go to the special needs schools and we take young girls, grade 11 in particular, and we then take them through the paces of self acceptance and how are you going to put your goals into action.
Mm.
We take them to speak about themselves because sometimes it's the first time when they're in our workshops that because they always have, and we understand it because we come from that, where everybody will speak for you,
Mm.
about you, but you never get the opportunity to speak about yourself. So Karen and I, we've developed these workshops for young women where we say to them, it's now your time for, and then we also train the teachers because most of the time the special needs schools, it's sometimes it's more caretaking. And we pushing government, it must have matrics. I sit on the council of UCT now. I couldn't be accepted as a student,
Mm.
but now I'm on the council of UCT.
Mm.
And we make sure that even at council level, that the accessibility, that those young people with their dreams and goals, if they're not getting the opportunity to go to the university, with that opportunity they should know what is my dream, what is my goal, what can I do, and not just look at, I always say, and what we say to these young girls is that don't look first at the obstacle.
Yeah.
Somebody will carry you up the stairs. You make sure that you're going to be there.
Mm.
You turn up. So we use these particular workshops so that the young people can socialize. Do you know, Petrus? Very few persons with disabilities are invited to parties.
Mm.
Just basic
Yeah.
stuff.
Mm.
Very few persons with disabilities will go to clubs. I go dance. Then I will go see who's with me. It's it's like we need to be a sorry sight. We need to sit in the corner. People must feel sorry for us. Those days are over. And that is what we instill in young people. You speak up. You don't need to be rude. You speak up. These are your rights. The more we speak up, the more we grab the opportunities, the more we're going to say, we are here. We're not going to vanish, because I usually give also training for diversity training to companies. And I will ask people who likes to eat a fatty chip roll, for instance, chips and stuff. High blood pressure, you can get a stroke. You can become disabled tomorrow. And what is going to happen to you? You will realize what the life is to live with a disability. And that's why the scenario, the fighting, and the activism, it's not just about persons with disabilities. It's all
Mm.
about accessibility. We've also, what we have done also with the student fund, which is NAFSAS, is with our work that we have done, we could influence them by looking at a separate grant for students with disabilities, that they can have access to technology, that they can have access to a carer that can be with them at campus, because you can get to campus, but then you still need transport to get to the classes. If you look just at the settings of the university infrastructure, doesn't actually is for persons with disabilities. What I want to say also to you is that the upside of COVID, we've realized the power of technology, the power of, and this is my next step that I think we need to go to, is that interaction and socialization for me is number one for persons with disabilities. So at Artscape, my first thing was to get audiences with disabilities to Artscape, to the
Mm.
theatre. You must be visible. And we made it possible. And we also have a company, Unmute Company, that caters for persons with disabilities, professional dancers, who's deaf, who's in wheelchairs, different kinds of disabilities. But in that way, we in the forefront. We're not just backseat. You on stage. You're going to see us. We're visible. But most important as well is that it the visibility goes alongside with the empowerment of the tools. So the technology is important for education, but it must go with socialization as well. Because what we've realized with the workshops that we do, we make the young person workplace ready.
Mm.
The reason why I'm saying to you, if you go and you've never
Mm.
had an interview, if you never socialized with people, when you're going for an interview to the workplace, eventually you get to the workplace, you don't know how to present yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. You
You
don't have,
were
you haven't
only
got the skills.
surrounded by family.
Mm.
So socialization is of utmost importance, Beatrice.
Mm. Mm. You have you ever considered, because I know you do counseling, of course, but have you ever considered being a teacher? As you know, education is obviously a very, very integral and important part of what you do. Have you thought about taking an active role in the teaching, or do you feel like you can do more by enabling or holding the institutions responsible or accountable to catering for these students?
Beatrice, my profession is a teacher. That's my
Yes.
first love.
Mm.
I will go to teaching back just like in two ticks.
Mm.
I was very lucky to teach at I'm in two very disadvantaged profession. I'm a disability activist and I'm an artist.
Mm.
And artists in our country, it's upside down. Artists doesn't really get funding.
Mm.
Um, and for me in particular, I always chosen when I was a teacher, I went out to start music as a subject in disadvantaged areas. And
Mm.
from there, I became a subject advisor. And then I
Mm.
didn't believe in outcomes based education that time, because I said outcomes based education is for privileged children. You need
Mm.
to have technology, you need to have the daily newspapers. And the education department that time made my life hell, and I made their life hell, because I wanted
Yeah.
music it must be on the same basis and arts as science and maths, because you need critical thinkers, you need writers in order for you to have a critical leadership. You need these artists, you need that. And for me, at that time, the education department said, LaRue, you are now really now pushing us to, we're going to have an arts and culture learning area.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. Then I've resigned, and then I was privileged to get Artscape. So Artscape and the education department, we are actually the wing of the education department to run for the schools music outreach programs, drama outreach programs, ballet, dancing, you name it. That's Artscape at the moment.
And is this like, what percentage of your time does this occupy, and the programs, the outreach programs for arts and social sciences, in comparison to your activism for, like you said, you should be an activist for everything?
You know, Petrus, I don't believe that you must sleep.
Mm.
You must do
You
what
don't
you
need
need
sleep.
to do.
Yeah, no, sleep is, sleep is when we're dead. You don't need that now.
No, like for instance, when the president announced COVID-19 is upon us, he forgot to say persons with disabilities. What are we going to do for persons with disabilities? I wrote immediately a letter, because what I've realized, when you're disabled and you don't have a carer, what you're going to do, you're going to die in your home.
Mm.
If you're living in a shack and you are in a wheelchair, it's not just about sanitizing your hands. It's about having gloves for your wheelchair that has contact with the ground. So, literally, that same night, I drafted the letter. I sent specifications so that the president and his staff team need to know there's a community that's the most vulnerable
Yeah.
community that you left out from
Mm.
your society.
Mm. And did you get adequate response at all?
I didn't give up.
Okay.
Petrus, I didn't give up. And they've acknowledged we are a task team now. I sit on the task team, and I said to the president, the task team is now over. It's implementation now. We can't just have task team upon task team. It's about then, I've then put me on the group of the education so that I can be, because for me, education plays a pivotal role. And then I've put myself on the resource center committee. So I say, if you are an activist, you can't just blah, blah, blah and have verbal diarrhea. You need to say, if you have an idea, you need to be able to do it yourself as well. So I give the president and his team a little bit of help. They know me. I write my letters. I write to the newspaper. I go on that radio. But I also do my bit. I know we are overwhelmed, but you can't just be an armchair politician. You need to be able to go out there and make a difference. So for me, I am not an armchair politician. For me, it is about, you need, what you say is what you must live and what you must do.
Agreed. This has been such a absolutely positive message that you've conveyed to us today. We want to thank you so much for talking to us. I just want to give you a last opportunity. If people want to know more about what you're talking about and what you're passionate about, and be inspired by your message and carry that over, hopefully, where could they find you? Where could they get more information?
They can get on my Facebook. It is Dr. Marlene le Roux. And then my Facebook page. They can also go to www.artscape.co.za, and there you can support us with our disability activists. And then we have a website, www.wand.co.za, and that is our disability activists. Please get involved. I think life owes you nothing. It's what you make of it.
That's a beautiful, that's an amazingly strong message to end off of. I want to thank you so much. It's been an honor to be able to talk to you. And I will definitely put all of those links that you've now mentioned in the description for people to easily access it and follow through on it. For our viewers specifically, if you've made it thus far, you most definitely like the conversation. And if this is something that you're passionate about and you think more people should know about it, please like this video and share it with your friends and family. Not only does it help out the channel, but it also helps out spreading the message and bringing more perspectives to everybody so they can broaden their worldview. So thank you for watching. This has been WorldView.